Before we enter into these topics, I want to briefly recount what we have said so that we see a continuity in what we are doing. We have said that there is no ego in nature. It is something that is found only in human consciousness. And when we are born, the child does not have any ego. It gradually develops. And mainly it is because the human child is extremely dependent on his parents for a very long time, something like 15 to 20 years. Because apart from the development of the body, there is also this whole development of consciousness, ability to express yourself, earn a living and all that. So it's natural for the child to feel protected, and it is necessary also for him to feel attached to his parents and to take their direction. And that dependence and that attachment grows in almost all human beings and in turn becomes the ego. So the conditioning comes from our family background and our national and cultural background. And the attachment to all this conditioning develops, which is what is the ego, constitutes the ego. So he feels it's my family. He feels protected in that family. It's my culture. It's my country. It's my religion, and so on. So a feeling of possessiveness, of identity, from which he also derives psychologically an importance and pride. All that develops, and so this development of the ego is a natural process and therefore it occurs almost in all human beings. But as Krishnamurti has pointed out, it eventually becomes the source of all the disorder in our consciousness. And we look at everything through colored glasses because we view everything and react to everything from this conditioning within ourselves. And therefore he stresses that in order to discover the truth, the universal truth, one has to free oneself of this conditioning. Otherwise, what you perceive is always colored by this conditioning. And our thinking, which is born of this conditioning, because it's all held in memory and thought is a response from memory, is a colored instrument. And that colors your view. And similarly, the view of the Chinese is colored by his background and so on. And that is what creates the division, the feeling of being separate from the other human beings and treating them as rivals or opponents or enemies. So we went into that, how the division arises, how wars take place and all that. And the start of all that is from our consciousness. So Krishnamurti is pointing out that the disorder in society is not out there. It is a result of what the disorder which is there in our consciousness. And so the crisis is not out there, the crisis is in consciousness. And you have to revolt not against the social structures so much, external social structures as against this inner conditioning within yourself. So he called it the inner revolution. So his revolution is not like the French Revolution or the Communist Revolution or the overthrow of government or replacing one system by another. That has very limited utility. It is like changing the structure in society, but it doesn't alter consciousness. And therefore, in that new structure, again, there is jealousy and there is disorder and there is politics and division and war and everything. So that is his analysis of the disorder in consciousness. So we said that this disorder is like a huge tree, and the ego is the root of the tree, and the different branches are its manifestations, which are thought, jealousy, anger, fear, violence, all the disorder, that all the negative emotions, they arise from there. But they are all, the root of it is in the ego. So this ego process is a great danger for man, both for our personal life and also for society. And therefore it's necessary to free ourselves. And yet it forms very naturally in each human being. So the question is it possible for a human being to wean himself away from this conditioning? It serves a certain purpose. And that purpose, for the first 15, 20 years, you need all that dependence, including psychological dependence on the family, to grow up and to have stability in life and so on. But after that, it is important to, just as physically one needs to learn to not depend on one's parents, but to earn and make a life of one's own. It is even more necessary, according to Krishnamurti, for us to no longer be enslaved by the childhood conditioning. It is that conditioning which creates the feeling of a separate me and the feeling of this continuing me, because the memory continues. And every new experience is just added to the memory. And so the conditioning grows, but it is continuing. So Krishnaji calls it modified continuity. There is no real change in that. And therefore, the larger issues like those of war and disorder or worry or anxiety or division, these psychological sufferings, they continue, and they are there in all human beings in every culture. So he has pointed out to this truth, and he says we are dealing with one branch at a time. That is, you are trying to solve the problem of fear or the problem of jealousy and so on, one problem at a time, or break one habit at a time, or end one illusion at a time. And you never get to the root. And therefore, that partial transformation, he says, is not really progress. It gives you a feeling of progress, that you are achieving something, but you are not free. And therefore, you are still contributing to disorder, and you get satisfied with small achievements. So he warns against that. And in this chapter, he points out that psychological time is an illusion. It comes to us because our experience in our daily material living is that you can make a plan, you can have an ideal, you can get experts to tell you how to achieve that, get the tools necessary, learn the techniques, put in effort, and achieve the result. So you can build a house like that, you can build a garden like that. We learn language like that. All our education has been done like that. And so the mind feels that this is the correct process also to use for psychological transformation. It carries over this experience of the material world into the psychological world. And Krishnamurti is pointing out that that is an illusion. In the psychological world, change does not come from this kind of gradual process of thinking and adjusting oneself and forcing oneself to fit into an ideal and so on. So the psychological time gives some kind of hope that I am violent today, but eventually, after some years, I will become non-violent. And for that, I need to study and I need to read and I need to practice this and practice that. That is our normal approach. He says that that kind of hope is false. You are just giving yourself time to continue to remain violent for all those years. And at the end of it, you won't come to it. His famous statement in this regard is that psychologically, the future is now. There is no evolution in time. The future is now. One has to understand this. It's a bit subtle. See, every human being thinks that when he achieves his aim in life, he will come to happiness. And so he pursues pleasures, thinking it will bring him happiness. He pursues knowledge, thinking it will bring him happiness. He pursues wealth and money and status, thinking it will bring him happiness. But he never questions that happiness may not lie in the future. We went into that at any given time, you have a number of things. You have a certain number of relationships, a certain amount of money, certain amount of knowledge, and you are standing at a line on this side of which you have things to which you have access because you have already acquired them. And beyond the line, there are other things to which you don't have access. And you think that by pushing this line and getting a few more things from the other side of the line onto this side, which means the line will get pushed further, you will attain happiness. But 10 years ago also you were doing the same thing. Only thing is you were at a different line. And today also you are doing the same thing, only you are now at a different line. So happiness will always remain in the future, and the future keeps receding, which means all the time one is living with dissatisfaction and seeking satisfaction. So what has to be perceived is that what is necessary is to perceive the truth of this, that so long as one is approaching life in this way, desiring to push the line at which one is standing, and thinking that happiness lies in the future, this whole process of approaching life with desire and ambition and the idea of gradual progress in time is an illusion. It's only when you perceive this that it breaks and there is real change. Otherwise, there is no change when you go from one line to the next line. So all the people, whether it's your servant or it is your clerk or it is a manager or it is the Queen of England or whoever, the rich man, They are just standing at different lines, but they all have this problem of desire and worry, fear, all of which we have discussed. Because the nature of that thinking is still the same. And that needs to be transformed. And that requires a deep perception. That perception is not a matter of time. It occurs in time, but it is not of time. Time does not help you to come upon perception. That perception we have called as the insight. It's a creative insight because it's something that changes your direction in life. You have been going along with certain assumptions and progressing and thinking that you are progressing. And it is to stop that direction and completely change and go in a different direction. That requires a deep insight. It's not a gradual process. One can ask oneself, after all, what is the difference between Krishna of 10 years ago and the Krishna of today? Krishna of 10 years ago had not read the books which he has read in the last 10 years. He had not had the experiences which he has had in the last 10 years, and so on. But it is not those experiences and that knowledge which brings transformation. So one has not transformed at all. This idea of progress psychologically is an illusion. You are not becoming happier. You are continuing in the same state. That is what it means that the future is now. Psychologically, the future is now. Materially and physically, it is not now. Because surely we have mobile phones today, which we didn't have 10 years ago, and so on. So obviously there is change outwardly. But in the inner, in the psychological, you don't become non-violent because the violence in you has a certain cause, and that cause has deep-rooted illusions behind it. And unless you eradicate those illusions by discovering what is true and what is false and ending the false, it won't change. And therefore it doesn't end. It goes on. And you keep on controlling yourself, and that is not a religious life. So in this field, he says time is an illusion. It is hope. It is desire for future security and so on. We went into that psychological fears, anxiety, worry, all that. And that doesn't go away by covering it up with wealth or achievements and so on, that which we have accepted. We have accepted that as the way to deal with this problem. And he's saying that's an illusory thing. So we said you will have to discover for yourself that this way of approaching life with ambition, with hope, with desire, and acquiring more knowledge, acquiring more relationships, acquiring more wealth and so on, and status, this whole thing is an illusion so far as psychological state is concerned. You remain in the same psychological state. You're looking across that line. You are at a different line now, but you are looking across that line with the same covetous eyes with which you were looking earlier. So the psychological state has not changed. Your intentions have not changed. Your aims have not changed, but your objectives have changed. You were earlier looking for small successes in small things, and now you're looking at bigger things. Or you were seeking material success, and now you are seeking success in the field of religion, etc. So the objectives are changed, but the approach remains the same, and that means the ego continues. The ego is this, is all the time seeking something more, for oneself. And that kind of approach is that I am dissatisfied with what I have, and I seek satisfaction by acquiring more of virtue, more of knowledge, more of this and that, and so on. So, in that sense, future is now. Psychologically, the future is now, which is the same thing as saying that perception is real action. You see, we think that if we are cunning and clever and so on and keep winning wars, we will end all wars. And it has never ended, because that whole approach, behind that, we went into that psychologically, there is psychological warfare between communities, and that is what gives rise to physical warfare. And we are only trying to solve at the symptom level, and the disease is at the psychological level. So unless we resolve this, we will remain eternally in the same state. And that's what one observes, that for 5,000 years we have had wars, and we are still at war. So psychologically, there is no evolution. That's what Krishnaji kept on stressing. And that requires this inquiry into oneself, of weaning away oneself from this whole process of accumulating the conditioning, adding more and more to the conditioning, and using the conditioning for solving the problems of the future. Because the conditioning itself is a problem. And we have not examined that conditioning and discerned what are the parts of it which create problems, and what is the part which is healthy and does not create problems. So that is what is this inquiry of self-knowledge. And in chapter 11, he goes into this detail about this learning, how to do this learning. We'll come to that tomorrow in the second talk. But in today's talk, he talks about this illusion of time, of gradual progress in psychological terms, which all religions have recommended that. They have said that have noble objectives, have noble desires, practice virtue, eschew vices, and so on. And human beings make conscious effort to do that, but it's not in the realm of decision, and therefore you are never able to achieve it. In fact, it keeps producing more and more struggle between what you are and what you should be. So this whole process of ideals and the achievement of ideals, Krishnaji has questioned. Not any particular ideals, but all ideals of the world and ideas of the world. He said that is not the way to end the disorder in consciousness and therefore in society. The Buddha pointed this out with a metaphor. He said, the only difference between two human beings is they are like two candles, and the difference between those two candles is the same as that between the candle in its present state and what it was half an hour ago. In human life, it would be, say, 10 years ago. What was Krishna 10 years ago and what he is now, that difference is of the same order of magnitude as the difference between me and you. Because what's the difference between me and you? We share the same body, the same consciousness. The only difference is in our conditioning. My conditioning is different from your conditioning, which is something which we have acquired from birth till now. And we are attached to that, which is what produces the division and the feeling of separateness. And he's saying that that difference is of the same order of magnitude as the difference between what you are today and what you were 10 years ago. Because that difference is also just the difference of conditioning, because your experiences and so on, which you had in the last 10 years, were not there 10 years ago. So it's a change in conditioning. And between one man and another man also, it is just a change of conditioning. But you are giving tremendous importance to that conditioning. And you are identifying that human being in terms of his conditioning and considering him to be his conditioning. We give it names, he's a Muslim, he's a Christian, which is all referring to his conditioning. Or he's an Arab, he's a Chinese, and so on. And this kind of division which we make makes us feel that we are very different from them. If you saw in depth, you would see that the differences are very superficial, and the division is coming because you have given tremendous importance to the superficial, namely what food he eats, how he prays to God, what is his concept of God, etc. But basically, all human beings are very, very similar. And the fact that we feel different from each other is just because we identify with our own conditioning. And that is the inner revolution that one has to come upon. And it's not a time process. It won't go gradually. Because if you allow time, then in that time, the conditioning, you are adding to the conditioning all the time. So you have to realize that the moment you realize the fact that this conditioning is not terribly important, that the opinions that you have collected from this conditioning are subjective and they are not truths. So then you will start examining them and you will no longer be dependent on them. And that's what is meant by freedom from conditioning. It is not obliteration of the conditioning, but it's no longer important. It does not dominate your consciousness, which means you are able to approach life afresh, not meeting it with all the past memories and so on. When you meet it all with the past memories and so on, it becomes a mechanical process. One example of that, which all of us can relate to, is that when you go from your home to your office, you will notice that it becomes a mechanical process, that you depending on whether you go by bicycle or car or you walk, you take the same turns and the same roads and you reach in the same time every day. And you don't have to think about it. But one day, the road is blocked. And then you can't do that. That day you need to sit down and think out afresh, which way should I now reach there? And that is when you have to use your intelligence and your awareness and your whatever to find a different way of reaching there. But otherwise, there is a tendency to be mechanical. And in the same way, when you mechanically just repeat your tradition and so on, it becomes a mechanical process. You are approaching life, which is every day. It's a live thing, it's a fresh thing with a dead mind, which is all based on past experience. And from past experience, you are judging. And he's saying, can you die to that process? Don't use that process. Don't collect all this information, conclusions from yesterday's experiences or 10,000 yesterdays, and then use that to take decisions and meet the future. Think it out afresh. Approach life afresh. Because when you do it mechanically, it brings in boredom. It brings in absent-mindedness. It brings in inattention. And you're not alive, you're not fully alive to the present, in the present, when you're not paying attention. The Dalai Lama calls it mindfulness. That whatever you're doing, be mindful. Have your mind in what you're doing, which is living in the present. But we have got used to thinking all the time about the past and the future. And most of the time, we are not actively present in the present, except when we face danger. When you face danger, then there is no time, and therefore time doesn't enter into the picture. You don't want to plan or how to do it, and you don't think about all that. You respond immediately. So he's saying the moment you allow time in a psychological process, it decreases your sense of urgency. You feel that you have a lot of time to gradually get there, to have that understanding and so on. And it is not true. It's an illusory process. Time doesn't help you to come upon perception. It requires a fresh mind, an attentive mind, and intensity is needed. And of course, sensitivity is needed, because when you are not sensitive, there are many things you don't perceive at all. And so he talks about also the fact that we have lost our relationship with nature. And nature is a source of so much beauty and joy. And if you did not lose your relationship with nature, then you would also have your relationship with humanity and in your own life in that way. But we have accepted this mechanical way of living, and we have lost tremendously. On his deathbed, one of the things he said to all the trustees, all of us, we were around him, he said, if only you knew what you have lost, this vast emptiness, that you don't know what this vast emptiness is. And that is such a blissful state, and you don't know that at all, because you're all the time relying on this thought process and the ego process and so on. And you have not broken through that process. So that is much bigger than breaking one habit or breaking one particular tradition. It is being completely free of the past. The mind dies to the past. And so he says that is also true of death. When you die, the physical death, you're not going to be able to carry your conditioning with you. You're going to lose everything. The money, the knowledge, the achievements, everything, your reputation, everything is going to go. So can you die to it now, before physical death? Don't wait for physical death to occur, but to discover what that death means, you have to die to that now. That is dying to the past. That is freedom from conditioning. That is approaching everything afresh. Which means what? Which means you had a quarrel with somebody last year, and now you approach him afresh. That the image of last year's experience does not color your meeting him afresh. Then there is no enmity with that person. There is no hatred with that person. And that is what is freedom from conditioning. Whether when we are able to do it or not is a different question. You may be able to only end certain more superficial illusions. We went into that, the nature of our illusions. And we said that there are illusions at deeper and deeper levels of our consciousness. And Krishnaji is talking about dying to the deepest level of our consciousness, namely the feeling of being a separate me, which comes from all this identification with the me and the mind. And we saw the consequences of that the mind becomes like a personal lawyer, all the time thinking about the gain for the me and the mind, the security for the me and the mind, and pleasures for the me and the mind, wealth for the me and the mind, etc. So it is all the time seeking something for itself, which means the self-concern becomes the dominant factor guiding our life. And that is the ego process. And that ego process, as we have seen, is the cause of all the disorder in consciousness, in our daily life, and therefore in society. So his teaching is that when you experience this disorder in your daily life, use it as an opportunity to learn about yourself, to watch yourself. Don't try to suppress it. Don't escape from it. Don't just learn to cope with it. Ask yourself, from where does it arise? It's a phenomenon that is taking place within your consciousness. Study it, observe it choicelessly, because the moment you make choice and you say this is good, that is bad, you make judgments and so on, you are bringing in your conditioning in doing all that. But awareness is unconditioned. You have this faculty of awareness and inquiry. These two faculties don't create conditioning. The inquiry into what is true and what is false, and awareness, which is this capacity to watch and pay attention. These are the faculties which create this kind of learning, which is self-knowledge. It's a wrong word, not really knowledge. It is really this ability to perceive the false as the false, so that it ends. Otherwise, one is a creature of habits, and we have divided habits as good habits and bad habits, or good desires and bad desires. And he's saying, no, habit itself is a problem, not just which habit. And similarly, desire itself is a problem. It is not whether it's noble desire or ignoble desire. So he is demanding creativity at the level of consciousness, not just at the level of creating things like a new mobile phone or a new discovery of some gadget and so on, or a new painting or a new tune of music and so on. He's talking about at a much deeper level. Creativity at the level of consciousness means you are free of, the consciousness is freed of the past. Otherwise, it's a prisoner. The scientists are trying to make robots, and they are trying to put all this, in the software, in the code. But the robot is completely mechanical. It's like a computer. It has memory. It has capacity to think. It can calculate and so on, but it has no awareness, and it has no capacity for creativity. So, when we function mechanically, habitually, then we are just becoming like robots or computers. And he's saying, break away from that. Can you come away from that? Get away from that. Don't identify with your condition. Now, as a scientist, I like to make equations. So, in order to illustrate how the ego is the main problem, not any of our faculties, I have drawn up these equations. which I have also quoted in my book. I think it's in the chapter on education. What is right education? You see, joy is a natural thing. You add ego to it and it turns into desire, habit, addiction, pleasure. Need, we all have needs. Add ego to it and it becomes greed and covetousness. Work, we all have to do work. Add the ego to it and it turns into ambition, status, position, all that. Wishes, it's quite a normal thing. I wish to go for a walk. I wish to have some food. I wish to meet my friend. You add ego to it and it turns into dependence, craving, desire, violence. Friendship, which is such a natural thing, just sharing something with a friend. Add the ego to it and it turns into attachment, dependence, and eventually gangsterism. You become gangsters, a group of friends, and the other group is enemies. Property, add the ego to it and it becomes attachment and fear of loss and so on. Thought, add the ego to it and it becomes selfishness and worry and isolation and so on. So there is no problem with joy or need or work or wish, friendship or property or thoughts. It's only when you add the ego to it, which is in our approach to it, that it turns into a problem on the right-hand side. So the ego is the cause, central cause of all disorder, and it is something that is our own creation. Because this identification process, it has taken place in childhood and it is continuing with us. We become physically independent, but psychologically we remain dependent on all this conditioning which we have collected. So just as the small baby has to be weaned away from the breast milk of the mother after whatever, 9 months or 1 year, in the same way, you need to wean away from the physical dependence on your parents and also on the psychological dependence on this conditioning, which is there. That means if I can use my thought and my abilities like tools, which are available to me when I need them, but they don't dominate my consciousness and don't dictate all my decisions and my what I should do, then I'm relating with it rightly. It's like a screwdriver. A screwdriver is used when you want to open a screw. But when you don't want to open a screw, you keep it in the drawer. It doesn't all the time occupy your consciousness. It's just a tool which I use when I need it. Can thought become a tool like that, which I use when I have to operate, when I have to drive a car, when I have to take a decision in my office? I use it. But it doesn't govern me all the time and doesn't decide whether I should be ambitious and I should be procuring this, and doesn't create desire and all that. Which means it needs to be freed from this ego process. And the ego process is actually coming in our own approach. And therefore, we can change that approach. If we discover for ourselves the danger of approaching life egoistically, it would end. That is the perception of the danger of it. And it's not there because when you have a narrow vision, don't see too far, it appears as if the ego is a protective mechanism. It is a friend. It is bringing me profit and so on, bringing me pleasure and so on. But when you see with a longer vision, you see that it is the source of all disorder in consciousness. So Krishnamurti is talking of dying psychologically every day to whatever you have collected psychologically, your likes and dislikes, your feeling of insult or hurt, or whatever reactions you had, anger, jealousy, you may have experienced that. You are through with it, you don't carry it over to the next day. If you are hurt, solve that day, and next morning when you get up, don't get up with the hurt, because that hurt distorts you from within, your consciousness from within, and spoils the future also when you allow it to continue. So don't let it continue. So not only the tradition which is coming from religion and from your family and all that, but the tradition of the conclusions from your own experiences, the images that we form of people and which we retain about those people, spoil the relationships between us. And so to be free of that, the authority of your own experience, that is real freedom, and that is freedom from the ego. So when he is talking about freedom, it is this freedom that he is talking about, not freedom, not just breaking one habit or one unpleasant experience, solving that one experience. That's like cutting one branch of that disordered tree. So he says ego is time. Time is ego, ego is time. Psychological time. The moment you allow time to achieve psychologically, you are approaching the thing with as an ideal to be achieved in time. That is an ego process. And therefore ego is psychological time. It's going from what is to what should be psychologically. And in that field, it's an illusion. It's an ego process. You may call it noble and so on, because the aim you consider to be noble. That's also your own conditioning telling you. So you have to free yourself of this process of all the time judging, saying this is good, that is bad, this should be there, that should not be there, which has become also a deep conditioning in our mind. So all that is involved in this freedom from conditioning, the ending of psychological time, the dependence on time for coming upon perception, and the freedom from all identification. Identifying with a fragment is to create division. So I'll end it here. That's more or less the gist of what he is talking about in this chapter. And he relates with that with death, because he says, if you can die every day, then you really live fully, because then that death is the death of the ego, not physical death, and he lived that way. He didn't have property. He lived a simple life. Simplicity is not just having few clothes or and so on. Simplicity is, the inner simplicity is no importance to oneself, is freedom from self-concern, complete honesty, no desire to project oneself as different from what one is, and humility. All that is real simplicity. But we have defined simplicity in terms of simplicity of dress, of having only a few things and so on. There is a interesting story illustrating this, a sort of parable, that the king was very fond of a monk. So he invites that monk and keeps him in his palace. And one day they go for a walk, and as they are coming back, they see that a big fire has developed and the whole palace is burning down. So the king merely says, oh my God, all my property, my things, my uh, palace is gone. And this monk, he runs into that fire and he says, what about my cane? So it was there and his attachment was to the cane, and that attachment makes him go and he perishes in that fire. So attachment doesn't mean a lot of property or less property is not attachment. Attachment can be there to your few things which you have, and there may be no attachment to the many things that you have. So it is how you approach the property that has to be understood. So your relationship with things, with people, your approach to them, that depends on whether you are possessive, you are attached. It is not the things in themselves that create the attachment or we approach it egoistically. So the ego is, we are entirely responsible for this egoistic approach to life, and that is the root of the tree of disorder and is the cause of the whole tree. And that tree is our own creation, of our own mind. It is not nature's creation. It is not something that exists there. The brain scientists, when they study the brain, they are unable to locate any area of the brain that corresponds to what we call the ego. There is no area of the brain which controls the rest of the brain, activities of the brain. So what the Buddha discovered after a lot of search, he said, thinking exists, but the thinker is not found. These were the words of the Buddha. And the scientists have now found that, yes, there is no central thing called the thinker in there. So that the fact that the ego is an illusion, is now physiologically, there is no part corresponding to the ego in the brain. That has been established by the neuroscientists. So I think pretty much I have summed up what he's pointing out in this chapter. And tomorrow we will take up the chapter on love. And then in the second talk tomorrow, his approach to learning about all this. So I'll end it here and we can have some discussion.
So Prasad, do you have a question you're going to ask, or you can go to Baldev?
I'll go next.
Okay, sure. Baldev, go ahead, sir. Unmute yourself.
So you mentioned that cutting those branches one by one gives the impression of introducing some sort of time. I don't think you mean that way. Can you just clarify that?
Yes. See, even to end one illusion, it needs a perception that that illusion is false, whether it is the illusion of your particular illusion about God or some superstition or some psychological illusion. It requires a perception, but it is not freedom from habit. It is not freedom from the past completely. So it's not total freedom. It is just the ending of one illusion. It's like giving up one habit, but you are not free from habits. You are still a habit mechanical creature. So how I understand Krishnaji to be telling us is, don't be satisfied with small achievements. We get satisfied that I am now free from comparison. I don't feel jealousy and so on. Yes, but you are still egoistic. You have not ended desire. You have not ended attachment. You have not ended possessiveness, right? So can you continue with the inquiry and not come to a conclusion and not feel, not end the, if your inquiry ends in satisfaction, it means you began with dissatisfaction. And that's a wrong approach. Don't approach it from dissatisfaction, searching for satisfaction, because it will find satisfaction in some conclusion or some answer, and then the inquiry will end. But if you are inquiring, you have the passion of inquiring in order to understand life and this whole process of consciousness and all that we are talking about, there has to be a passion for doing this. And then you stay with the question. You don't end the question, and you can go deeper and deeper if you stay with the question. But if you stop it and you come to a conclusion, then you have ended the inquiry. You end the inquiry before you get to the root. That is how I understand it.
But
So
sir,
we eventually see that all these disorders are connected to each other. It's one single ego field, and you see it as separate branches because they manifest one at a time in your consciousness. But don't be satisfied with just solving one of them. You need to reach to the root and see the connection between all of them and get out of that field. That's what he's saying. You may not be able to do it. You may be able to get where you get. But his teaching is that ultimately freedom means you have to end the whole thing.
but sir, my question was that, let's say if you finish with the jealousy, and
But
if you finished, let's say, with one branch, jealousy, and then you still continue working on others, so isn't we are introducing the factor of time?
no, one is not saying that time is required for this. One is saying perception is required, and perception is not a matter of time, but you may not come upon perception. So the earth will continue to rotate around the sun whether you come upon perception or not. So the chronological time will pass.
Yes.
You don't come upon the falseness of something. I have seen 50% that it is false, then 75%, then 100%. It is not like that. It is either you have seen it is falseness of that, or you have not seen the falseness of that. So it's not that the professor of philosophy is closer to the truth than Gardner. He has more ideas and more explanations and so on, but he's not closer to the truth. So either you have perceived the truth or you have not perceived the truth. It's like he gave an example somewhere. He said, either an egg is rotten or it is not rotten. Similarly, either a girl is pregnant or she is not pregnant. It cannot be a half pregnancy.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So, Prakash Sharma, please.
Well, sir, the very idea that future is deceiving, would it not generate the psychological fears? And if it does, then how to overcome it? Or what is the role of learning mind to overcome this psychological fear?
Prakash, the very idea of working on it in order to achieve a result is itself the process of desire and ambition and sustains the ego. So one has to approach it not like you approach academics and so on to achieve some results, but as a mystery to be understood. So you are applying yourself, and whatever understanding you are able to get, you are still inquiring. Like also in science we do that, in physics we do that. You keep inquiring, and all right, so you had Newton's laws, and for a long time you accepted Newton's laws. Then you saw the limitation of it, and then you asked further, and you came upon relativity. Then you asked still further, and you came upon quantum mechanics. And now they are finding that, well, why is gravity not part of quantum gravity? So it is continuously, you are going from one question to another. So the inquiry continues. And the change is a byproduct of this learning, not the aim of this learning. It's a byproduct. As you learn, you come upon wisdom, and changes will occur. But when you make the change an aim of this inquiry, it goes wrong, because then it becomes an ego process. So that is
Thank
what
you.
don't approach it with the idea of changing yourself. In fact, you have to realize that you can't change yourself because you are the problem. It is not the entity who is judging and saying, I should not be this way, I should be that way. That entity itself is the ego, is the problem. The conditioning or the... So,
Yeah.
It's a very circuitous thing. It's a circle, vicious circle. Yeah. I am trying to discover the truth, and I am myself also in the way, is what one is saying. Therefore, I must die to myself. Yeah. I must get out of the way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cecilia Martinez, please.
Hi, you're listening.
Welcome.
Yes.
Good to hear you. Go ahead.
Good evening, Professor.
Good evening.
Mm, Professor, when we talk about death, there is physical death and psychological death. And Krishnamurti says that we fear death because we don't know how to live. We don't understand life. And he says that if we die psychologically, we will be free from fear. We will know what love is. And in a previous chapter says, if you live peacefully, you will have no problem at all. You may be imprisoned because you refuse to join the army, or shot because you refuse to fight, but that is not a problem. You will be shot. It is extraordinarily important to understand this. And then I wonder, shouldn't one keep his life, defend yourself from someone who wants to attack you as you would defend yourself from an animal or something else? So, Professor, it could say that if you live peacefully, you don't physically defend yourself against an attack by an aggressor, because defending yourself involves violence. How can we understand this that Krishnamurti shows us?
I'm reminded of a question that was put to the Dalai Lama. A journalist asked the Dalai Lama, Sir, you are the leader of Tibet, religious leader of Tibet. Your country has been occupied by the Chinese. They are torturing your people. You have run away from there and taken shelter in a neighboring country, India. Under these circumstances, how can you be so happy? And the Dalai Lama's reply was, see, there are only two possibilities. Either you can do something about it, then go and do it. Or nothing can be done, then that's also all right. That is also all right, he's saying, which means, I understand that to mean that it is not necessary that life must come without any sorrow for me, bring comfort to me, and so on. It is not necessary. Life may bring sorrow, life may bring violence, life may bring death to me, but you do what you can to face the situation. But to have this frustration that why did this happen to me, that is what the ego is saying. Why should it not happen? I mean, there is so much suffering in everybody's life. And to say that there should be no suffering in my life, what I am myself creating as worry, as fear, through psychology and so on, that is my responsibility. I can end it. But tomorrow the earthquake comes and it brings death, then you have to just face it. This COVID has come and you have to face it. What will you do? So we cannot complain, otherwise it becomes a self-pity. One is saying that nothing, no disaster must come to me in life. Well, life is, nobody promised that life will be all pleasure and joy when we were born. You accept you were born and life has both joy and sorrow and pain and pleasure. So to complain about it has no meaning. You have to only question what you can do about it. And there is nothing you can do about it, then that's also all right. Leadbeater once made a statement. He said, nothing matters much. Most things don't matter at all. We begin to give a lot of importance to it. And he's saying in the larger scheme of things, in the whole universe, tomorrow you have a war and lots of people die. I mean, to us, it seems that it should not happen and so on. Right now, this COVID has come. To us, it feels like a big change in our life and disaster. But nature is prospering. The trees and the birds and the animals are all prospering, and the atmosphere has cleaned up, the rivers are cleaning up, because man's interference has stopped for temporarily. So even our existence, I mean, we give importance to our existence on earth, but actually we are great parasites on earth. And if we are not there, the earth will survive much better. All the species will survive much better without us. That is a scientific fact. So this whole great importance is all born out of self-concern, or the concern for one's own race or one's own religion or one's own family. All that, to have this identification with human beings only and not with plants and animals and other forms of life, is also a division the mind creates. So in that sense, he's saying it is important for you to learn to live peacefully, which requires all this, understanding yourself and so on, and freeing yourself from the past, what we have talked about. Then you will come upon wisdom. That wisdom will tell you what to do in a particular situation. You are wanting the answer at the level of action without coming upon wisdom. You have to come upon the intelligence. You awaken your intelligence, then your intelligence will tell you what to do in that situation. That's what I understand him saying. That means the problem is the absence of wisdom, the absence of love, the absence of sensitivity is the problem. The problem of human beings dominating over each other. the problem of poverty is also all created by greed and so on, which is manifestations of the ego. So you have to couple that with his other explanation that we are all responsible for the entire state of the world or of human society, what is happening to the world. It's not only some people who are responsible. If crime is taking place, we are all responsible. We have all contributed, created a society in which there are criminals are born and raised. So in that sense, a larger responsibility. So the ultimate solution is not giving you immediate solutions. Immediate solutions have all been tried, and there are immediate solutions. But the long-term solution is what Krishnaji is talking about. That all this disorder is coming from this ego process in us. And if we don't end it and don't come upon a learning which ends it, then this disorder will inevitably be there in society. And you are only saying it should not come to me. It is all right if it comes to the neighbor. That's not on.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you.
Prasad, you want to go next, sir?
Yeah, thank you. Professor Krishna,
Yes, sir.
I have a question regarding the psychological time.
Yes.
At two places in the chapter, Krishnaji pointed out that psychological time is the gap between the idea and the action.
Yes.
That's one thing that you went through. I like, future is now, and you explained that today.
Yeah.
So the second part, like he said at one point, like it is the gap between the observer and the observed.
Yeah.
What is like, can you elaborate a little bit between the observer and observed? And also, is it the noise in the head that goes on, like, when we are not attending to totally and there is some kind of distraction? Is that kind of psychological time, or how can we?
Yes.
Yeah.
They are all product of the ego process. And the ego process includes all these habits, the habit and including the attachment to thinking. We are not able to use thought like a tool only when we need it, but the thought goes on, and that is the chattering of the mind. And that chattering of the mind becomes a distraction which does not allow you to pay full attention in the present. All that. So all that is also ultimately the root is the ego process. And the worry and the anxiety and the chattering and boredom, all those are different branches which of the tree. But the process, the central process is that of continuing with this identification with our conditioning and not freeing ourselves from the conditioning. That's how I understand what he is saying. So the gap between the observer and the observed is, the observer is this conditioning. He is the one who is judging, who is evaluating, who is saying this is good, this is bad, this should be there, this should not be there. All that, right?
Yeah.
It will vary from culture to culture. In Islam, you could have 4 wives and widow marriage is permitted. In Hinduism, widow marriage is not permitted. And if she marries widow, it is considered wrong. So it is just subjective what your conditioning tells you. Vegetarianism similarly, some people are vegetarian, some are non-vegetarian, coming from which caste, what you have been told. So those you dislike the non-vegetarian if you are a vegetarian, and it is just his habit is different from your habit. and you consider that his habit is cruel, he says this is food, right? You say it is cruelty. You're, if it's just, if you awaken compassion in a human being, and his compassion extends to the animal and the plant, then he'll automatically come upon vegetarianism. That is different, that is transformation at the level of consciousness. But when you have not come upon compassion and you have vegetarianism only as a habit, it is just a norm. I mean, he eats meat because right from childhood he has been given that meat is food. And I have grown up as a vegetarian, so I don't regard meat as food. Both are just two different habits. That's why, and habits can change. So Indians go to Europe and then they turn, after a few years, they give up vegetarianism and they become non-vegetarian. That's just one change of habit. But it doesn't mean you have come upon compassion or kindness in your consciousness. So it's not at the level of action. It is at the level of consciousness. And at the level of consciousness, this ego is the source of all disorder. Which means the observer is the source of all disorder. If you are observing through this, when you can free yourself of the personality, which is the conditioning, then there is observation without the observer. And that, Krishna says, is the truth. If you can observe without the observer, then what you perceive is true. Otherwise, even the Christian perceives a thing differently and the Hindu perceives differently and so on. So it is just your conditioning is coloring your reactions.
So the noise is in between the observer and the observer.
Yes, the noise is the chattering of the mind, which is also coming from your conditioning.
Thank you.
Anybody else has any questions? So while waiting for others, if I may, bring up something. Baldev had raised this question about jealousy as a branch of the tree, and you had mentioned in your talks several different branches like anxiety or anger or whatever that might be. They're all there as branches, and it is the root that is important to be addressed.
Yeah.
And the whole root is the ego process, as you have been mentioning. And would you say, sir, therefore, the thing that is common to the ego process, that which is common element to the ego process, if that is addressed, if that is addressed by a mind that is of learning nature, learning mind, if that is addressed, and the fallacy of that, or the falseness of that, or the illusion thereof, of that common thing, if it can be addressed, the whole root can be uprooted.
That's right. That's the teaching. That you don't stay with the question long enough. You give it up and you are satisfied with small achievements, that I have freed myself of jealousy, or I have broken this habit of alcoholism or smoking, and you are satisfied with that. You are not asking the larger question of all habit, all mechanical action. If you understand the larger, it includes the smaller. But if you are only looking at the smaller and feeling satisfied with having solved the small problem, you don't address the larger problem at all. So if you accept Newton's theories and so on, you don't come to the picture of the universe which we have today, which is the larger. But having understood the larger, we now understand what Newton was saying, and it's not false, but it is limited. It's limited. It's applicable within certain limits. Yeah. Like that. Here also, it is like that. That you can. So there are wise people who are not free people. They are wise because they have broken through several illusions, but not all illusion. Their mind is still in illusion, but it has broken through some of the illusions, like which are easier to see through. And when you really start inquiring from your present state, which is that of mechanical and habitual and identification with the conditioning and so on, it's the easier illusions, simpler illusions which will go first. Just as when you start learning mathematics, it's the simpler problems that you understand first. And you will understand eventually differential equations and integrals and all that. So here also there are deeper and deeper illusions. But if you get satisfied with small achievements, and you said this is enough, now I'm quite comfortable. So you are seeking pleasure, you are not seeking truth. So it has to be a passion for truth and not simply the passion for solving one particular problem. In fact, his statement is, life is not a series of problems to be solved. That's Krishnaji's statement. It's not a series of problems to be solved. And we regard intelligence as the capacity to solve problems as they arise in life. Yeah, that whole approach is false. Because you are creating the problem and then another part of you is solving it.
Which also is a part of the ego process.
Yes, yes, quite right.
Baldev, sir, you want to go next?
Yeah, I just want to ask one quick question also. So, so my question is that what are the common threads between the ego and all these branches? Like thinking is one of them. What else? I mean, there are the main
Oh, fear,
common.
sorrow, worry, boredom, ambition, attachment, jealousy, all the disorders of the consciousness, all the negative emotions.
So what are the common threads of all these emotions to the ego? Like thinking is one of them, which is in everything is present.
We went into that in the previous chapters, where he pointed out that when thought interferes with, it produces desire and ambition and so on. So there is a natural thing like joy or beauty which you perceive, which is the joy in that activity, that's natural. But then thought comes in and says, I wish I could have this every day, or I wish it had been more. And so then your search for the more begins. And then you begin to start with, you are now dissatisfied with what you have and you are seeking satisfaction. And that starts this whole pursuit of pleasure and so on, which ultimately leads to more complications and so on, because that's an ego process. But joy is not an ego process. When you see the sunset and there is the beauty, the perception of that, in that there is no ego. But in saying, I wish I could have a house here so that I could see this sunset every day,
Right.
then you have brought in desire and ego and so on.
But the thinking is one of the common factors. Looks like between the jealousy and desire and everything.
Thinking, no? Thinking, egoistic thinking. It is not thinking. The motive behind the thinking is egoistic. It is seeking something for itself.
Right, but is there anything else?
It's not interested in what is right for the whole. It is seeking personal benefit and profit.
Yes, sir. But my question is there any other factor apart from thinking which comes into play between ego and these branches?
Yes, I mean, there are the instincts, huh? The instinct of seeking pleasure and avoiding
Yeah,
pain
yeah, right, right.
is there. The senses,
Yes,
so yeah, physical things like physically, certain smells are pleasant, certain
yes.
are unpleasant,
Okay,
etc. But basically, yeah, sources can be several.
right, right. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. And also, pleasures include psychological pleasures, like somebody praises you
Yeah, right.
or supports you, then you like him, he's your friend. And somebody opposes you, then he is your critic or he is enemy or rival.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah, that whole thing is in the approach. In your approach, ego is creating all that feeling.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Yeah,
Any,
and we went into it, how Krishnaji looked at criticism. He says your critic is looking at you and pointing out something wrong in what he thinks is wrong in you. And you need to examine that before discarding it or reacting to it. But you don't approach it with a learning mind, then you are just becoming against him and calling him names and so on, that he's a fool, he doesn't understand me and so on. Yeah. So you don't learn. But when you have a learning mind, the critic is your best friend.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. If you understand that friendship is not support or agreement, yeah,
Yes, sir.
then your critic appears to be your best friend because he's pointing out that you are going wrong somewhere and he's helping you to come upon the truth if you are in some illusion.
Yeah, like my wife is a good critic of me, so that's a good thing to keep her.
Yeah, in all families, at least Indian families, you'll find that the women are much wiser than the man. They hold the whole family together. It's the man who feels that he is dominating. Just because he has money and he brings money. And I mean, he's treated as the captain of the team.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
any other questions from anyone?
Yes, I have a question. I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you, Professor Krishna.
You're welcome.
On the matter of conditioning, my question is, as I begin and continue somewhat to experience my conditioned self, I feel a certain sense of liberation from myself. As if my world is opening, even in this moment. I feel like I've never felt before. And now, could this not be considered a new condition? So, in fact, to me, it does. I feel like I'm in a condition now in this group here with myself, with all of you, that's quite totally new. And I would call it, and I'm asking you, would this not be a condition of a totally different order? I'm trying to stick with the word condition to,
Yeah.
try to expand.
It can be, the danger is there if one is collecting Krishnamurti's ideas, adding it to one's own existing conditioning. And so you have a new layer of ideas sitting on your previous ideas. And then that is the Krishnamurti conditioning of the mind. Then you have not come upon the truth. You have just come upon the memory of Krishnamurti's answers or Krishnamurti's directives. That is, you can become a professor of Krishnamurti philosophy. And that means your consciousness doesn't undergo any change. So it is just knowledge. It's knowledge of Krishnamurti's teaching. And one has to beware of that. That is why he keeps on saying that don't accept what I say. Don't just make that into a new set of ideas to be carried in your head and then acted upon. Treat this as an inquiry. Investigate along with me and Discover the truth of it or the falseness of it. Don't also assume that it is the truth. You don't know what he means, and is that true? And don't answer it just intellectually, because you will answer from your conditioning. You watch your own consciousness operating in daily life. Calls it the mirror of a relationship, in which your consciousness is constantly revealing itself. And as you watch choicelessly, with these questions in your mind, whether it is true or not, you will come upon those insights, and those insights are the real things. The insight is into truth, is the real thing. And the seeing the false as the false ends the false. And that is the process of self-knowledge. Now, if it hasn't gone up to there and one has just collected new set of ideas, it just becomes another piece of knowledge, the knowledge of Krishnamurti's ideas. I said in one of my talks earlier that the professor of philosophy knows everything that the Buddha said and the Jesus said, and he can explain everything. But his consciousness is not the Buddha consciousness or the Christ consciousness. So knowledge doesn't bring you to transformation of consciousness. And that's why wisdom is something quite different from knowledge. And it's important not to have approached Krishnamurti's teaching as just another piece of knowledge, but as an inquiry into our life. Whatever he's pointing out, you have to inquire into that and find out. His statement was, as you stay with the question and explore the question, the answer lies inside the question, not outside. You can't get it from somebody else or from that book. That would be getting it from outside. That would be just an idea. It won't be truth. Ideas are easy. There are paths to get the ideas, but there is no path to truth. You have to come upon perception for yourself. That's why it is important not to accept. I mean, I think I don't know of any other teacher, probably the Buddha said that also, that don't accept what I say, investigate it. In Buddhism also it is there, that you have to inquire for yourself. You have to be enlightened to yourself. So that's why in Krishnamurti's teaching and in Buddha's teaching, there is a lot of similarity. In Buddha's teaching for the monks, but in Buddha also gave the Eightfold Path, which is just like any conventional religion. This, don't do this, don't kill, don't steal, don't look at women, whatever. So those are do's and don'ts. So I think he differentiated between the religious-minded people and the common people. But that division Krishnamurti didn't make. He never gave two levels of teaching, one for the common man and the other for the religious mind. Yeah, one is the religious person. Yeah, he never did that. He never brought the truth down to try to convey it to the common man. That's why most people find it difficult to understand Krishnamurti or engage in this inquiry, because they feel it's beyond their mind. It's beyond their comprehension. It's only after you inquire into this, you begin to see different depths into it. There is an interesting passage in this book, Meeting Life, which I'm reminded of. Let me see if I can find it. I'll read it to you, and it talks of this. Questioner says, I have been listening for some years to your talks, and no change has come about in me. That's the question. So Krishnamurti says, then don't listen anymore. Now look, sir, if you listen to somebody for years and you see for yourself the beauty of what is being said, then you want to listen more. Then it opens doors to you which you have never seen before. But if it doesn't, then what is wrong? What is wrong with the speaker who says these things? Or what is wrong with the listener? Why is it that a man or woman who has heard the speaker for many years is not changed? In that there is great sorrow, isn't there? You see a flower, a lovely flower by the wayside. You glance and pass by. You don't stop to look. You don't see the beauty, the quiet dignity, the loveliness. You pass by. What is wrong? Is it that you are not serious? Is it that you don't care? Is it that you have so many problems that you are caught up in them? No time, no leisure to stop so that you never look at that flower? Or is it that what the speaker is saying has no value in itself? Not what you think about it, but in itself, it has no value. Has it no value? To determine whether it has or has not, you have to investigate what the speaker is saying. And to investigate, you must have the capacity to listen. You must be able to look. You must give your time to it. So it is your responsibility, or is it the responsibility of the speaker? It is our mutual responsibility, isn't it? Both of us have to look. The speaker may point out, but you have to look. You have to go into it. You have to learn. And if your mind is not diligent but negligent, if your mind is not watching, highly sensitive, it's your doing. That means you have to change your ways of life. Everything has to change to learn a way of living which is entirely different. And that demands energy. You cannot be lazy, indolent. So since it is our mutual responsibility, maybe more yours than that of the speaker, perhaps, sir, you have not given your life to it. We are talking about life, not about ideas, not about theories, practices, not even techniques, but to look at this whole life, which is your life, and to care for it. And that means not to waste your life. You have a very short time to live, maybe 10, maybe 50 years, but don't waste it. Look at it. Give your life to understand it. That's his teaching. You're welcome. I'm glad your question brought this to my mind. I could share it with all of you.
Anybody else has any questions for the professor? Or you want to say anything in closing summary before we depart, or?
Well, just this occurred to me that, it may seem from the point of view of knowledge that we are repeating ourselves again and again, but the truth doesn't change. So from whichever angle you come to it, you come to the root. And that route is the same, whether you start from analyzing fear or pleasure or looking at anything. So ultimately it will appear like repetition, but it's not repetition. And in any case, one should not carry the previous lecture and the previous investigation, the memory of it, into this one. It's not a field of knowledge where if you have learned one chapter, then you go to the next chapter and you don't need to read that chapter again. It's not like that. Yeah. There is a dialogue in which Krishnaji begins with a small group and he says, what shall we discuss, sir? And somebody suggests, let's discuss desire. And another man says, no, sir, we talked about that last week. So Krishnaji interrupts and says, just a minute, sir. Why shouldn't we look at desire again? Have you freed yourself of desire? If not, we should investigate it again. So he's saying, just because we looked at that question 1 week ago, doesn't mean you don't have to look at it again. You have to persist with it till you find the truth. You have not come upon the truth, you have just come upon some ideas, then that's not the truth. That's what it means to stay with the question. In Ojai, in a certain year, I think 74 or something like that, he told David Bohm that, you know, the trouble is you people don't stay with the question long enough. If you stayed with the question, you would see the truth to which I am pointing. But you come to some conclusion either that it's not possible or it's too much or I don't understand it, and you give up and therefore you don't come upon it. So he suggested that those who are more serious, let us go into some spot, close ourselves and stay with the question all the time until we have seen it. So they tried that. He went with some 10 people like David Bohm and Fritz Wilhelm and some other names are there. And it's there in the archives, and Bohm used to keep notes of it every day, what transpired in those dialogues. Those notes are there in the archives. But it failed. I mean, he tried his level best, but at the end of 10 days, none of them had come to it. So the barrier is, there is some, in my opinion, these are not his words, these are my words, that there is some deep-rooted barrier within the human consciousness which prevents the human consciousness to see the truth. It will sense that that is true, that what Krishnaji is saying is true, but it refuses to perceive it fully with all its senses, and it doesn't become a fact like the fact of fire or drowning in the water. It doesn't become a fact. It remains as an idea in the head. More so probably for the intellectual, because we are so trained into converting everything into ideas and thinking about ideas and arguing about ideas. And that's why the dialogues that we have also tend to become more like discussions, not so easily what Krishnaji intends by dialogue. He intends that you are all seeing together the same thing at the same time and the same level, and so on. That is very rare to achieve that. Most of the time it is my view, your view, and listening to each other and so on. Yeah.
Sir.
Yeah. So it's not that these teachings are not some easy method to solve our problems. It's wrong to approach it like that. These are pointing to truths. Now, truth is neither easy nor difficult. Truth is truth. Whether we are able to perceive it is not our problem.
So would you say, therefore, sir, that when we read or listen or watch a film of teachings by Krishnamurti, would you therefore say that we are first hearing the words or reading the words and the verbiage, which in itself is highly limited, and then we are translating all of that into our own understanding?
That's right. So you must not accept that understanding. Because when you read Krishnaji's book, your mind also interprets the meaning of the words which he is communicating. He is coming from inside. He is seeing something. In order to communicate it, he puts it in words. Those words don't create insight in us. Those words become ideas for us. Now that idea you mustn't accept, because idea is not truth. You must investigate it, find out. And in your daily life, with staying with that question, you can come upon the truth, the same truth which he came upon, or Christ came upon, or Buddha came upon. You have to come upon that. It's not the knowledge of the truth which is important. The knowledge of any of these, Buddha's philosophy, is just knowledge. Knowledge is mental property. It does not transform consciousness. Neither your physical property nor your mental property transforms consciousness. That has to be very clearly understood. Transformation of consciousness means ending the false, unlearning the false in your conditioning. There is a lot that is false. And the difficulty is that the mind that is in illusion is not aware that it is in illusion, because it takes that illusion to be the truth. Right? That your own ideas you accept as true. If you had seen them as false, they would not be there. So you haven't seen it as false. So you don't know where your ideas are false. And that is the difficulty. That's why the truth is unknown. And so it requires a creative perception from the unknown to bring it into the field of the known.
That's where the inquiry must continue to go on and on and on.
And this mysterious process by which the human consciousness is able to perceive something that is not known and bring it into the field of the known. But you can discuss what blocks insight. You can't, there is nothing, you can't discuss what creates insight, but you can discuss what prevents insight. And our job is to eliminate that which blocks insight. You can't create insight. The insight, if it comes, it comes. For example, you can get the knowledge of what Einstein is talking, but you won't come upon the insight which his mind had into space, time, matter, and energy. Only very few. They say that some 4 or 6 scientists in the whole world had the insight into that. The rest of them are using mathematics instead. Here there is no mathematics. So you can't solve it like that. Yeah. So in this religious quest, without insight, you have only ashes. You have only ideas, and ideas are not truths. That's a big difficulty of this religious quest.
So could we take one more question from...
He's saying you mustn't call something as impossible. Otherwise, you make it impossible by calling it impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So grapple with the impossible question also. So it's the politician and the businessman who says, I will do only what is possible. Yeah, the religious man doesn't classify things as possible and impossible. He's asking into what is true and what is false, not what is possible and what is easy and what is difficult. No. What is true and what is false? That's the question.
So Cecilia has a question, if you have time.
Well, I want to say thank you for this opportunity to share and learn together.
You're most welcome.
Maybe I can share something I write when I reading the chapters. I write. It seems that what really exists is energy, something that cannot be defined by words, nor understood by thought, but ego, thought, has taken on a life of its own to create an illusion, which we call life, and that illusion is the belief of our own existence and the whole social and psychological structure on which we base our existences. Perhaps when we go so far as to disconnect of this illusion and perceive that truth, I really can't go on because being just a glimmer and not a deep understanding. I can't go any further, and because trying to explain it would be thought and words. I think the great beauty of this is that it cannot be expressed. It can only be perceived.
Quite true. Quite true. Very true. What you said is very true. I'm glad you have got that far as to perceive this.
It's very passionate way Krishnamurti says, the passionate to learn and discover.
Yes, our mind creates all these illusions. We are not aware of our own creation of illusions because we take them to be true. A lot of them are not true. That's why it is important to investigate. Because we have this symbolism, no? Everything. We have symbols about what is sacred, what is God. You put that symbol in the church and you call it. So these are all images. Images means imaginary things. And we take the imaginary things and we worship them. And what you are worshipping is your own creation, your own thought. It's not the actuality, no? So Krishnamurti has not denied God. He has denied all our concepts about God. He has not denied the sacred, but he has denied all our concepts about the sacred. He says, you don't know what the sacred is. Find out. You don't know what God is. Find out. The atheist also doesn't know. He has the opinion that there is no such thing as God. And the theist has his own image about God. Both are images. Neither of them knows what the reality is. It's only when you posit it as the unknown and question it and say, what does it mean? That you can come upon a deeper truth or understanding. Otherwise, you will fight over the images.
Perhaps we can end it here, sir.
You're welcome. Yes. Thank you. So tomorrow we meet. Tomorrow is all right for you because it's
Yes.
July. In America, it's a big occasion.
Oh, no, it's okay.
COVID.
We're fine. So we'll meet at 2 o'clock California time,
Right.
which is 5 p.m. for you.
And so, yeah, we deal with love and learning, these two topics.
Thank you, sir.
You're
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Krishna.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.